Now I'll pass it to Kyle to walk us through Quick Answers, the generative AI knowledge assistant that can support research and investigations within law enforcement. Kyle?
Great, thanks, Dominic. Let me get this up and running. Okay, so I just like to start before we get into the product with a little background on what exactly Qlik Answers is, how it works, why it's different than if we were just go to ChatGPT today and start asking questions. So when we look at LLMs, I think all of us at this point have seen the stories about how this generative AI can go wrong, where it can have hallucinations, where it's trained on the internet, so it's very easy for the assistants to start to answer questions that are off topic or give information that is not accurate, not based in a truthful source. We've also seen where they can ultimately, not be able to use information that is not available to them, that might be behind a firewall, that might be internal to an organization, or they just have a knowledge cutoff where most of these models are trained through a certain point, a lot of them over a year out of date at this point. And so how do we address not only giving the most recent information, but also accurate and trusted information to make sure that they're giving answers that we're comfortable with and not hallucinating and making up incorrect answers? So there's a few different ways we can approach that. The first is something called prompt engineering, and that's just a matter of adding additional instruction to the question that we're asking. So when we start to ask our question, we might also add context like use sources such as this, or respond in this type of tone, or use this particular type of answering style. So that's obviously a lot of work, and we don't expect a lot of users to have to become prompt engineer type personalities in order to use these. They need to be able to just ask natural language questions. So another thing we can do is something called fine tuning, where we are actually taking that foundation model, that LLM, and then we are updating the parameters of the LLM with information that's relevant to our organization. This can be a really expensive process, not only just in terms of having someone with the expertise to be able to do that, but the infrastructure that's required to now maintain and host and continue to operate that model that you are now responsible for because you branched it from the original. Finally, the last approach is something called retrieval augmented generation, and this is what Qlik Answers uses. We use an out-of-the-box foundation model, so we take the model that we know is tried and true, and instead of updating the parameters, instead we will do a search for relevant context to the question that's been asked by the user, so that we can add a source of information that is trusted and say to focus the answer only using this trusted source of information. So what does that look like in terms of a visualization? So if I went to ChatGPT today and I asked a question of a chat assistant, it has no access to the documents that are internal to my organization. So if there are PDFs or Word docs or PowerPoints that my organization has that has the right information that a user may be asking for, the LLM has no knowledge of that. And so what happens is the question is posed to the LLM, it gives an answer. That answer may or may not have the right information in it. We have no idea where that answer was generated from, what information it used to create that answer. And so we're kind of left in the situation where we have to blindly trust the response that was given. When we introduce the concept of RAG, we're breaking down that barrier between the LLM and the documents that have the trusted information that I want to use for my users to get answers. And so the first thing we're going to do is take those documents and put them into what's called a vector database, or what we call a knowledge base in Qlik Answers. So basically we extract the text from the documents, we break them into chunks, and then we turn them into these numerical representations that make it really fast to find the right information as soon as a user asks a question, so they're not sitting around waiting for a search to happen. So now when a user comes and poses their question to the chat assistant, the first thing that's going to happen is the assistant's going to go to that knowledge base and say, do you have any knowledge from my trusted sources related to this question that the user has asked? And then that context is appended to the user's original question. So now when we send that request to the LLM, it not only has the user's question, but it has the information that it's allowed to use as a trusted source, so that the answer that we get is not only more complete, but we have citations to understand where that answer was generated from. So we can say, here's the source of the information we used in our response, so that you can go and verify and trust the answer that was provided. The environment I'm going to show you is incredibly simple to use. But I want to emphasize that this simple interface that we have here at Qlik with Qlik Answers came from acquisitions of decades of experience in building these RAG systems. And so under the hood, there's a lot of complexity happening that we are abstracting away into a very simple interface for you to just connect to your data sources and then build an assistant very quickly. A RAG system, this is just a few points of what happens behind the scenes in terms of the pipeline. There's the process of extracting those data files, of breaking them into the appropriate chunks, doing something called embedding, which is turning them into the numerical representation, choosing a vector database provider and storing them in there, and then all of the LLM components that happen after that. So as simple as it's going to look when I show you the product, just know that really there is a lot of complexity under the hood, especially when you talk about doing something like this at scale across an organization with hundreds or thousands of users. And then finally, the last piece I want to emphasize before we get into the product is really touching on the security behind it. And so we know that there is a lot of concern around some of these LLMs, where they're being hosted, who's responsible for the data that is being used to train these models going forward. And so that's why we orchestrated a security environment with Qlik Answers that makes sure that all of your data is contained within the secured tenant that you have entrusted Qlik with. And so again, if any of you are existing Qlik users, I'm sure you've all gone through, your organizations have gone through detailed security reviews of the Qlik platform and everything that we do. And so rather than use any third-party services or send your data outside of that secure environment, everything we're doing with these assistants in generative AI is occurring within that secure tenant environment with tenant-level encryption. And so you're never exposing your data, and there's really a firewall between the model that we're hosting and making available to you and the original model provider, so that that information can never be exposed into a training of a future model. So with that, I'm going to switch screens here. Great. So for today's example, I've gone ahead and found a couple files that I've loaded into the system here. One is, you had Tim earlier talking about that national incident-based reporting system. I went ahead and pulled the 167-page user manual that's available from the FBI for that, as well as a little bit of a manual about NDIS and some of the procedures that go on there. And so what we've created here is that knowledge base that we were just talking about in terms of a trusted repository of documents that we are making available to the assistant and to the people asking questions. And so the scope of these assistants will only be the information that we have introduced through this knowledge base. So in this case, you can see I've added those 2 PDF documents here. They are telling me how many pages were in each one, and they're now part of the knowledge base that I've made available. There's a few different ways that we can connect data to Qlik Answers into these knowledge bases. So for today's example, I just went ahead and uploaded a PDF directly into the platform. And so that's obviously going to be hosted on Qlik Cloud. More practically though, you might use a data connection. So this allows you to keep the data at the source system. So let's say you have a SharePoint site or an S3 bucket or a Dropbox location that has all of these secure files that you are continuously updating in the organization. Rather than you needing to duplicate those documents and maintain what's the most updated version of it, what's been deleted, what's been added, you can quickly just connect to these sources, and Qlik Answers will just utilize the data at the source. So we'll index at the source system. We do not duplicate the documents, and then all we store in your tenant are the vector embeddings of the text. So basically the document's not being replicated in a way that you have to worry about maintaining it in 2 places. If you connect data from a data connection as well, you have the ability to set a schedule. So you can come in to any of your sources and determine how often you want it to go and check for changes to that data source. So you can say, go out daily, check if there's been documents added, deleted, or updated, and then appropriately update my knowledge base to reflect those changes. So my users always have the most recent information that they need and not any out-of-date information that may come from just using an out-of-the-box LLM. So once we've connected our data to a knowledge base, it's very easy to create an assistant from that. All we do is hit the Create Assistant button, and then we give it a name and some information about what the assistant is. So in this case, I'm just going to call this FBI bot. And then put it into a space that I've set up for today's webinar. And then just like that, I now have a generative AI assistant whose knowledge is limited to those 2 documents that I've pulled and loaded into my knowledge base. And so we can immediately start asking questions of these documents. So going back to the neighbors document, we could ask something, for example, let's say I'm a user and I'm trying to figure some information out as I'm entering data values into the system. I might ask, which location value should I use for a movie theater? So through 167 pages of a document, it can quickly find the exact answer to what I'm looking for and provide that answer for me directly in the chat here. So you can see here, it's telling me that for a movie theater, I should use the data value corresponding to amusement park. And I'll be able to also see the source of where it found that information. So I can see not only the document that was used to source that answer, but the particular page and paragraph that was used to find that specific information. And if I wanted to, I could then go directly to that document at its original source. These conversations maintain context. So if I wanted to ask a follow-up question related to this, so for example, I might say, what is the data value for amusement park? And then it will be able to continue to maintain that and follow up with the answer. So it's going to tell me that the data value for amusement park is 38. And again, cite the source. So, it's giving me some good answers here. I'm going to give feedback that that's a good answer. And then I can start to ask information of a different document. So, for example, we added a document about over here, the NDIS system. And so we maybe might ask a question like, how can an agency add a lab if they need to? And so it can now go to that different document, find the procedures for adding a new lab, and then spell those out in a way that it's useful to the user here. So you can see, again, it's able to find that answer very quickly and then tell me the document in which it originated that answer from. So it found it in the NDIS operational procedures manual, and then what pages and paragraphs it used to put together that instruction for how to do so. The last thing I'll kind of add with this is that one of the benefits of an LLM is that it is naturally multilingual. Because it's trained on the internet, it learns a lot of the major languages that are present on the internet. So if I ask that same question in, let's say, Spanish, even though none of the documents are written in Spanish, it is able to understand the question and then provide an answer in the original question's language, which can be a really valuable tool when it comes to trying to reach a broader audience in terms of who this information is being provided to, and who it's enabling in terms of exposing this type of these documents and what information people might be looking for in them. So these are all really great answers. They're answering what I'm looking for from the documents. But I do want to emphasize the importance of not going beyond the scope of the original knowledge base that we provided. So let's ask a question that I know is out on the internet. For example, what are some key differences between Qlik and Power BI? So that's on the internet. I can Google that. I can go ask an LLM out of the box. It will answer that question. But more importantly, Qlik Answers will not answer that question because it does not have any documents that are specifically on that topic. So the idea here, the design is that it will make sure that users cannot kind of go off the topic or the trusted data sources that you are providing through your knowledge base, so that they have very focused and trusted information that's coming to them from these data sources. And then I can give feedback that, this wasn't a very helpful answer. I need competitive intel. And all of this feedback that I'm giving to the platform here, these thumbs ups, thumbs down, are being collected in a very convenient review portal here. So I, as an administrator, now have this really great visibility into not only what questions are people looking for answers for, but what documents are they using to get those answers, so that I can make sure that not only are our documents up to date, I can make sure they're getting trusted information, and I can make sure that there's not knowledge gaps where people maybe are looking for information and not getting it because we don't have any sources to provide that answer. So this visibility, to me, is a highly valuable component of what Qlik Answers can do, because people are out there looking for information today and using documents, whether they're the right documents or not, and you really don't have the visibility into that. So to be able to kind of understand what knowledge people are looking for, where they're getting it from, and where you need to fill in gaps can be an extremely valuable component of this platform. And then finally, one of the last kind of pieces I'll touch on inside of here is the customization ability. So you have the ability to come in and do some deep customization around the types of messages that might go back to users, the avatar that's used for these assistants, any welcome messages, as well as create some conversation starters where you can pre-seed some questions for users to be able to see so that you can kind of guide them in the direction of what types of questions they can ask of this tool. And all of this is completely embeddable. You can pick this assistant up and embed it maybe into a Qlik dashboard. Maybe it's into an intranet site or an internal portal that users are using, but you can ultimately put these into the tools that the users are accessing day to day so that they're not needing to log into Qlik in order to ask these questions of these assistants. It's very quick to build them and then deploy them into whatever tools are most appropriate. So it can become a really powerful tool. And like I said earlier, hopefully you can see it's extremely easy to configure and set up and to start getting this visibility. And that's really the importance here of what we're trying to emphasize. We want to make this as accessible to as many people as possible with the least amount of friction to get these trusted and reliable answers. Okay, with that, Dominic, I'll hand it back to you and we can go from there.
Thanks, Kyle. I think one question you quickly covered, talk around we just saw you build the knowledge base from the documents, but talk about how some of the security can be set up so that, only certain numbers of user individuals can set up their own knowledge base and only folks can access that. So can you talk a little bit how, kind of the knowledge base can be secured or managed by certain, individuals?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also saw a question in the Q&A regarding having multiple admins of a knowledge base. So I'll cover a couple of the security things around the Qlik answers in general. So one thing I do want to point out is that you can connect multiple knowledge bases to an assistant. I asked that question earlier about competitive stuff. So let's see if I went in here and pulled over this additional assistant. So now I've added additional context in this knowledge base. So if I went back to this conversation and I asked this question again, because I have introduced that knowledge again, assuming that this knowledge base that connected isn't out of date, you can see it will now start answering questions. So because I have added that access to the right information, it will start answering that same question that it wouldn't answer before. So that's one thing I do want to point out is that you can connect these different data sources to a single assistant. But for the security aspect of this, let's say that I, as a user, have permissions to a space where this knowledge base exists. So let's say I have read permission to the space that this exists in, but I don't have read permission to the space that this second knowledge base exists in. The assistant is smart enough to only answer questions that I, as a user, have at read access to. So we use the same space management and space security parameters that are used throughout Qlik, if you're familiar, to make that security available. So for a user to get answers from a knowledge base, that user needs to have read access to the space that the knowledge base is stored in. For them to see the assistant at all, they have to, again, be a read user of that space. And then for them to be able to control the knowledge base in terms of that question about multiple admins of a knowledge base, if they have edit access to a space, to be able to come in, they can change the knowledge base and administer that. So the answer to Chrissy's question is yes, you can have multiple users that have edit access to a space that contains a knowledge base, and then both those people can control the knowledge that's inside of there. And then additionally, there is a role called audit admin, which gives you the ability to see these review questions. So only a user with an audit admin role will be able to overview and see all the questions being asked, the answers that are given, the feedback that's given. So not necessarily every administrator of an assistant can see this. It's also another specific role. So we've recently introduced in Qlik a lot of what we call fine-grained access controls that allows you to be very specific about the types of tasks that a user can conduct in terms of being able to create, to read, to write, etc., with these different assets that you have here.